Bruce Lee was pushed by a kung fu bully and said enough, 3 seconds later made him cry. Bruce Lee was pushed by a kung fu bully and said enough, 3 seconds later made him cry. The training hall smelled of sweat and liniment, the floorboards creaking under the heavy footsteps of the students. Wang Feiheng, a Hung Gar master known for his brute strength and explosive temper, had arrived at Yip Man's gym that afternoon with a single purpose, to humiliate the young Bruce Lee. He had already heard about the Wing Chun prodigy, the boy who learned too quickly, talked too much and, worse, defied traditions with his ideas about martial art without rigid forms. "You're fast, kid," Wang sneered, pushing Bruce against the wall with a slap to the chest. "But speed without strength is like a tiger without teeth. Let's see if your Wing Chun can take a real punch." Bruce didn't back down. His eyes, dark and sharp as blades, locked onto Wang's. He could feel the heat rising up his neck, the tension in his shoulders, but he kept his posture relaxed. Years of training under Yip Man had taught him that anger was dead weight. And he already carried too much weight, the contempt of traditional masters, the distrust of his peers, the shadow of his own father, who saw his interest in martial arts as a shameful distraction. "You talk a lot," Bruce said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But so far, I've only seen you push like a spoiled child." Wang growled and charged forward, his right fist clenched in a broad punch, loaded with brute force. Bruce dodged with minimal movement, as if the air between them had turned liquid, and counterattacked with a precise pack saw, hitting Wang's elbow and knocking him off balance. The Hung Gar master stumbled but recovered quickly, spinning with a roundhouse kick that Bruce blocked with a clean tan saw. The surrounding students stopped to watch. Yip Man, in the corner of the room, crossed his arms but did not intervene. He knew Bruce needed this, needed to prove himself as much as he did to others. Wang attacked again, this time with a series of short punches, trying to trap Bruce against the ropes of the training ring. Bruce dodged, redirected, but Wang was relentless. A left hook grazed Bruce's chin, and for a second, he felt the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. It was then that something inside him broke. Not calm, never calm. But patience. "Enough," Bruce said, and his voice cut the air like a blade. Wang laughed, readying another punch. "Enough? I haven't even started." Bruce didn't wait. In a movement so fast the eyes could barely follow it, he closed the distance, deflected Wang's punch with a bong saw and delivered a series of short, devastating blows, a jab to the solar plexus, an uppercut to the chin, a chop to the neck. Wang staggered, eyes wide with surprise. Before he could recover, Bruce spun around, using his master's own momentum against him, and hurling him against the floorboards with a takedown that made the entire room shake. The impact brought a groan from Wang. He tried to stand up, but Bruce was already on top of him, knee pressing into his chest, right hand holding his wrist in a painful joint lock. "You're strong," Bruce said, breathing controlled, eyes burning. "But strength without intelligence is like a blind bull. You can knock down walls, but you'll never beat someone who knows where to hit." Wang tried to pull away, but the pain in his shoulder made him wince. "Let go of me, you." "No," Bruce interrupted. "First, you will listen to me. You came here to humiliate me, but you only proved one thing, that you don't know how to fight. You depend on your strength, your size, your reputation. And that's all you have. When you meet someone faster, smarter, hungrier than you, you will fall. And you will cry like a baby." Wang spat blood onto the floor. "You arrogant." Bruce pressed the articulation key, and Wang screamed. "It's not arrogance. It's true. And if you don't learn that today, you'll spend the rest of your life being defeated by men not half your size." For a moment, there was only the sound of Wang's labored breathing and the creaking of the floorboards. Then, slowly, Bruce released his wrist and stood up. Wang dropped to his knees, clutching his shoulder, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and shame. You're nothing," Wang growled, but his voice cracked. Bruce wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand. "I know. But at least I don't pretend to be. The hall fell silent. Even the older students, who had previously been rooting against Bruce, now looked at him with something close to respect. Yip Man nodded almost imperceptibly, as if to say, "Now you understand." Wang stood up, staggering, and left the room without looking back. The door slammed behind him with a bang. Bruce took a deep breath, feeling the weight of victory, and the even greater weight of responsibility. He knew this wasn't the end. Wang would return, or send others. The world of martial arts was like that, full of men who confused pride with honor, strength with skill. But he also knew one thing: he would not back down any further. And that, after all, was what really mattered. Bruce remained in the center of the room, his fists still slightly clenched, his knuckles marked by the impact of the blows. The air smelled of sweat and polished wood, and the echo of the slamming door still resonated on the walls. The younger students exchanged nervous glances, while the previously skeptical seniors now watched him with a new curiosity. Some even approached, murmuring among themselves, "This boy has courage. But can you handle what comes next?" Yip Man stepped forward, his footsteps silent as always. He stopped in front of Bruce, his dark eyes assessing him not with judgment, but with a kind of recognition. Without saying a word, he extended his hand. Bruce hesitated for a moment. It was the first time his master had made such a gesture, before he squeezed her firmly. "You fought well," said Yip Man, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But you can't win a fight with strength alone. If you want to survive this, you'll have to learn to think like a warrior, not like a bully." Bruce nodded, feeling the weight of the words. He knew that the master wasn't just talking about the fight with Wang. He was talking about the path ahead, a path he himself had chosen by not backing down. 2 days later, Bruce was in the back courtyard of the hall, training alone. The afternoon sun beat down, and sweat ran down his back as he repeated sequences of kicks and punches against a makeshift sandbag. It wasn't just technique, it was anger, frustration, the need to channel something I couldn't name. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. "You train like you're in a hurry." Bruce turned around, recognizing the voice before he even saw the face. It was Liang, one of Yip Man's oldest students, a man with broad shoulders and scars on his arms who told stories he never shared. Liang crossed his arms, watching him with a half-smile. "Or as if you were afraid," he added. Bruce wiped the sweat from his forehead with his forearm. Afraid of what? Of not being good enough. Of Wang coming back with more people. Of the world out there not being as you imagined. Liang shrugged. Everyone has fear. The difference is what you do with it. Bruce didn't respond. He knew Liang was right, but he wasn't ready to admit it out loud. "Yip Man wants you to start training with the advanced students," said Liang, changing the subject. "But only if you are willing to listen. And obey." Bruce raised an eyebrow. "Obey?" "Yes. Because up until now, you've just done what you want. And it works, until it doesn't." Liang approached, his voice lower. "Wang won't forget this. And he's not the only one. You crossed a line today. Now, you either learn to walk it, or you're going to fall." That night, Bruce couldn't sleep. He lay on the thin mattress in the room he shared with 3 other students, staring at the cracked wooden ceiling. The sounds of the city, horns, laughter, the distant noise of a fight, came in through the open window. He thought of Wang, of how the man had walked out of the room with his shoulders hunched but his fists still clenched. He thought about Yip Man, about Liang, about the looks of the other students. And, above all, he thought of himself. There was something inside him, a flame that wouldn't go out, no matter how many times the world tried to smother it. But now he understood that this flame needed direction. It wasn't enough to be strong. It wasn't enough to be fast. You had to be smart. At dawn, he got up without making a sound, put on his kimono and went out into the courtyard. The moon was high, and the air was cool. Bruce positioned himself in the center of the space, closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I wasn't going to train punches. I wasn't going to train kicks. I would train patience. The following days were different. Bruce was still the same, impulsive, stubborn, full of questions, but something had changed. He began to observe more. Listening. Questioning not just others, but yourself. Yip Man put him in training with the advanced students, and for once, Bruce didn't mind being corrected. He didn't care about making mistakes. Because, for the first time, I understood that every mistake was a lesson. Wong didn't return. But Bruce knew he was out there, waiting. And he wasn't the only one. A week later, Liang pulled him aside after practice. Tonight, you're going with me, he said, without explaining anything further. Bruce followed him through the dark streets of Hong Kong, his heart beating faster. He didn't ask where they were going. It didn't need to. They reached a narrow alley, where a worn wooden door opened before Liang even knocked. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the sound of muffled conversations. Men with marked faces and sharp gazes turned to them. In the center of the improvised hall, two fighters faced each other in a circle of spectators. Here's where things get real, muttered Liang. Here, there are no rules. There is no master to intervene. Just you, your opponent, and what you are capable of doing. Bruce felt the blood pulsing in his temples. It wasn't a challenge. It was a test. And he was ready. The makeshift ring was a circle of loose boards, lit by light bulbs hanging from bare wires. The smell of sweat, menthol oil and dried blood permeated the air, mixing with the smoke from the cigarettes burning between the spectators' fingers. Bruce observed the fighters in the center, a tall, broad-shouldered man with scars that snaked down his arms like maps of battles past, and a smaller, agile man who danced around his opponent as if his feet were barely touching the ground. The big man threw a punch that echoed like thunder, but the smaller one dodged it with almost supernatural precision, counterattacking with a sequence of blows to the kidneys that made the other man bend over, panting. That's the kind of fight you don't see in schools, Liang said, leaning in so only Bruce could hear. Here, there are no belts, there are no judges. All that matters is whether you can stay standing at the end. Bruce nodded, but his eyes never left the ring. The smallest of the fighters, now with his hands bandaged only with dirty strips of cloth, smiled at his opponent, revealing blood-stained teeth. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, cold, calculating. When the big man tried to grab him, the man threw himself back, using his momentum to kick his opponent's temple with the sole of his foot. The impact was dry, and the larger fighter's body collapsed like a bag of sand. The crowd roared. Coins and notes exchanged hands quickly, while some men swore and others laughed, pleased. Liang crossed his arms, watching Bruce with a look that seemed to measure every reaction. Have you ever fought like this before? He asked, although he didn't expect an answer. No rules, no limits. Just instinct. Bruce took a deep breath. I knew what that meant. It wasn't just a test of skill, it was a test of character. In a place like that, where violence was currency, weakness was synonymous with death. And Liang hadn't brought him there to be a spectator. As if reading her thoughts, one of the men in the crowd, a guy with a narrow face and yellow eyes, with a scar that bisected his eyebrow, approached. He looked Bruce up and down, sizing him up like he was cattle at an auction. Liang's new recruit, he asked, his voice drawn out. It seems that Master is collecting puppies now. Liang didn't move, but his posture subtly changed, like a feline about to pounce. He's not a puppy. He's a wolf that doesn't yet know he can bite. The scarred man laughed, a harsh sound that ended in a coughing fit. Then let's see if he barks or bites. He turned to the crowd and raised his voice. Who wants to see Liang's boy get beaten up? Several hands went up, accompanied by screams and laughter. Bruce felt the weight of the eyes on him, but he didn't back down. I knew that, at that moment, any hesitation would be interpreted as fear. And fear, there, was a sentence. Liang placed his hand on Bruce's shoulder, an almost fatherly gesture. You don't have to do that. I want it, Bruce replied, his voice firm. The man with the scar smiled, showing crooked teeth. Then take your shirt off, kid. Let's see if you can last 3 rounds. Bruce complied, unbuttoning his shirt and letting it fall to the floor. The cold air of the alley made his skin crawl, but he ignored it. His muscles were tense, ready. It wasn't the first time he'd fought. On the streets of Kowloon, he'd learned that survival often depended on how many blows you could land before being knocked down. But there it was different. There was no escape. The man with the scar entered the ring, flexing his fingers. He was older, but his movements were precise, trained. Bruce positioned himself in the center of the circle, feet firmly on the ground, fists raised. There was no referee, there was no count. Just the two of them, the crowd and the sound of their own breathing. The first blow came quickly, the opponent's right hand shot toward his face. Bruce dodged on instinct, feeling the wind from the punch pass close to his ear. He counterattacked with a low kick, aiming for the ribs, but the man blocked it with his forearm and retaliated with a hook that hit his chin. The impact made him stagger, but he stayed upright, shaking his head to clear his vision. The crowd shouted, encouraging violence. Bruce tasted blood in his mouth, but smiled. This was what Liang wanted him to see, that fighting was not just technique, but also endurance. It didn't matter how many blows he took, it mattered how many he managed to return. The second round began with the man with the scar trying to grab him, but Bruce dodged, using his speed to his advantage. He delivered a series of punches to his opponent's stomach, making him retreat. When the man tried to recover, Bruce spun around and hit him with a roundhouse kick to the side of the head. The impact caused the older fighter to stumble, but he recovered quickly, launching himself at Bruce with open arms, trying to pin him down. They fell to the floor, rolling between the loose boards. Bruce felt the weight of his opponent's body on top of him, his fingers trying to grab his throat. With a sudden movement, he managed to free himself, pushing the man away. They both stood up at the same time, panting. You're fast, the man with the scar admitted, wiping the blood from his lip. But speed doesn't win a fight. Strength does. Bruce didn't respond. He knew that the next blow would be decisive. The man advanced again, but this time Bruce didn't dodge. Instead, he ducked at the last second, using his opponent's momentum to throw him over his shoulder. The fighter's body hit the ground with a thud, and the crowd erupted in applause and boos. Bruce didn't wait. He took advantage of his opponent's moment of disorientation to kick him in the ribs, then another, and another, until the man raised his hands in a sign of surrender. Enough, he grunted, coughing. He arrives. The crowd fell silent for a moment, before exploding into screams and laughter. Liang walked over, placing a hand on Bruce's shoulder. Now you understand, he said, his voice low. There's no second place here. Either you win or you break. Bruce looked at the man on the ground, who was now getting up with difficulty, supported by 2 other fighters. There was no hate in his eyes, only respect. And something else, something Bruce recognized as the same hunger that drove him. Liang threw him a towel, which Bruce used to wipe the blood off his face. Tomorrow, you'll come back. And you'll fight again. Bruce nodded. There were no more doubts. That night marked the end of one phase and the beginning of another. He was no longer just a student, he was a fighter. And, from then on, every blow he took, every fall he took, would be another step on a path of no return. When they left the alley, the lights of Hong Kong shone in the distance, oblivious to the violence taking place in the shadows. Bruce took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. I knew that, from that moment on, nothing would be the same as before. And I was ready for it.